Hello, gents. I recently watched Iceberg Law's video, Everybody Hates Ray Tracing, and was reminded of a previous direct in which you discussed some gamers' frustration with quote-unquote forced ray tracing. As an impoverished console gamer that only follows advances in PC graphics technology as something of a spectator sport, I'm curious, did any previous then new technology, such as pixel shaders, etc., have such a high performance penalty relative to its subjective benefits in the eyes of the average player? And John, we've talked about this several times before, haven't we? And it's nothing new. It's basically every major advance that comes along. Somebody says
every time
there's no visual return that it justifies the performance cost, and also there was just a different mentality to demanding games in the past. What would happen if Crysis came out today?
Or anything before, like PC gaming used to be about that, pushing the envelope forward. I mean, I remember Origin Systems back in the day when they were pushing stuff like Crusader, No Remorse, and various other types of games, or EA's, like, what was it? It was the U.S. Navy fighters comes along. MechWarrior 2 comes along with its 1024 by 768 mode, 3D accelerators first arriving, pixel shader stuff, and all that HDR pipelines. When all of this stuff was hitting, it was significantly heavier in terms of the impact on performance than I would argue ray tracing has been. Ray tracing's heavy, but when you're talking about like 90s, 2000s era, like adding new features, we're talking like frame rates in the teens, sometimes worse depending on your hardware. Like this was not performance stuff. It was like, this is new stuff, and the new stuff, just being able to display it at all was exciting back then. And the frame rate expectations were completely different at the time. 60 FPS was a gosh darn luxury. When 3D accelerator cards were first hitting, you'd actually look on the back of the box and it would say, you get all these effects at 30 frames per second. That was a feature, 30 frames per second was. That's where we were at back then. And obviously, that's not to say things haven't changed. Like, the expectations for frame rate are very different, but I am surprised at how PC gaming really went through that transformation where people just it became more about just high frame rates as opposed to pushing things forward, pushing technology forward. And I can see why, because I would say this is the fault of the PS360 generation, where those systems, this is when developers mainly moved to multi-platform. Before that, there was still a lot of development being done either just for PC or just for console. Never the two shall meet, except when they did, but that wasn't that common. But then PS360 generation comes along and almost everything's multi-platform. And because the PS360 were around for so long and fairly weak after, a few years, PCs just blitzed through it. PC gaming was all about just pushing high frame rates, and there wasn't really a lot of innovation happening in the graphics themselves. It was just taking what existed and running it faster.
Mm-hmm.
And then ray tracing was the first return to that in a long time, where it was like, here's a fundamentally different way of rendering things. This is new. And I feel like a lot of people that were then into PC gaming, they didn't grow up with the way it used to be. They don't remember that, and they don't frankly care. They just know that they're not getting their high frame rates anymore, and they don't like that. And I don't agree with them, but I do understand where they're coming from in that sense. So it's a tricky situation just because the PC gaming landscape has changed so darn much compared to where it used to be.
I mean, there's so many PC sort of innovations that came about and basically depressed performance. Even when, DX11 came along, games got DX11 patch upgrades that just tanked performance and weren't really worth bothering with. But I go back to like when Quake came out, right? Yeah.
Hugely important game, demanding game. Like, Quake was a game where, like, my PC, it was a year and a half old when Quake 1 came out. It could run the game at about 2 to 3 frames a second.
Yeah.
In the smallest window. Like, but I didn't, I didn't like that, but I was like, man, this is the future. Look at this. So when I upgraded, it was awesome to be able to run it smoothly. There was a lot of stuff like that. I mean, there was even games I remember mentioning, like MDK from Shiny didn't run on anything except for like a Pentium and above, and it would actually just straight up say, you can't play this. Sorry. Like it wouldn't even boot on a 486. So you don't have the necessary hardware. You can't play this game, which is something that's pretty much unheard of today. You can usually force anything. I mean, I saw some guy trying to run Windows 11 on like 256 megabytes of memory recently, and I was laughing the whole way. He somehow did it, but it took like 40 minutes to boot, which is great. But so I don't know. I think the reaction is just the difference in the way the market is. Yeah. And like I said, I don't really blame them. If you got into PC gaming a bit later and you're expecting something completely different than what it used to be, like that's how the market played out. And yeah, something like ray tracing, it is heavy. I think it's necessary though, and we're in that growing pains period, but I think we're coming out the other side, because like you look at Doom, the Dark Ages, which restarted this conversation. That thing freaking runs on like the earliest ray tracing capable GPUs pretty darn well. It's very playable. Like you can play this thing on like a 2060.
Yeah. Yeah, Alex showed
which is super cool, right?
Yeah, in actual fact, Alex's Doom video was quite sort of exceptional in showing that when the original Doom came out, the high-end PCs were struggling with it. And what actually amused me about that is that they had that kind of fat pixel mode, performance mode, if you like, which is essentially the most basic form of upscaling. The original Doom had an upscaler.
It kind of did. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It just doubled the pixel width.
Yes. And you're quite right. I mean, I remember upgrading for Doom. I remember upgrading for a bunch of games, simply because you saw them and you had to play them, and it drove an upgrade. But now it's like, hey, I've already spent X amount on a GPU 5 years ago. I demand great performance.
Like back then, let's say you got a brand new Pentium system, like a Pentium 133, it's great. And literally, like within the next 6 months, 3DFX drops the Voodoo or something, or the Rendition Verite comes out. That's more money you got to drop, because around that time, there's going to be games that won't run, or will run much, much worse. That now you need a 3D card for.
Yep, and Quake is another classic where I remember, because we bought a new games PC for the office, and it was 486 based, and it ran everything great, right? And then the Quake demo dropped, and it's like single digit frame rates on a tiny window, and it's like, Carmack's basically saying, you're going to need a Pentium to play this at a decent experience, and it's like, well, okay. Let's do it.
It's just wild, the amount of stuff that was happening within such a short period of time, right? Like you could get a 48666, but then the Pentium hits, and then now there's 3D graphics cards. This is all in the span of like 2 or 3 years. Yep. Like it's the same like weird time scale thing. Like when you think about like Nintendo 64, and then you have Dreamcast, right? The N64 came out 2.5 years before Dreamcast, basically. Like that's nothing. Right? That's less time than the mid-gen refresh that we see for modern consoles, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like, here's a new generation 2.5 years later, basically. I think that's absolutely insane. Like the speed at which things were changing. You were if you wanted to keep up, you had to buy this stuff, and it was happening so fast in a way that just does not happen anymore.
Yeah.
Like that's why my argument was like, look, if you had if these games don't support a graphics card from 10 years ago, it's like tough. Like, I'm sorry. Like that's 10 years of support for graphics card is amazing. That's a ton of support. But eventually for the good of the medium, you got to move on. Like,
I'd say we got it easy compared to the 90s for sure.
Big time.
I'm curious about your take on this, Oliver, because obviously it's a different era for you.
A slightly different era. Yeah, I mean, when I was playing on PCs for the first time, that was like 2004 or so. Oh. And I it's a bit of a different era, but I mean, I still remember back then when you were playing with like chipset graphics, integrated graphics on those laptops, it was a totally different category of experience. Like you could still play the same games mostly, although there were some games like I remember I couldn't play Battlefield 2 because it required 120 megabytes of VRAM, and my chipset only had 64 megabytes of VRAM, so I couldn't play it. There were lots of instances like that where you just flat out could not play a new game, and that certainly is very rare today. Like on almost any integrated graphics system, you can play everything. Just the poor frame rates, right? There's never really a hard cutoff, or very rarely a hard cutoff. And certainly back then, playing a game like Half-Life 2, it was pretty miserable. But you could play like World of Warcraft on it, okay, at like, 15, 20 FPS. Again, okay, it's a different kind of standard relative to what people are used to today. So even in that context, when I got my first gaming desktop in 2005 with a 6800 GT and an AMD Athlon 3800 Plus, that was like a total revelation in terms of the kinds of games I could play. I could play basically everything that I wanted to at good frame rates and resolutions. And like that was a big difference before, like when you were going from the low end kit to the high end kit throughout the kind of graphic stack. Even in those days, which is like relatively late compared to the time periods that you guys are referencing. But it was just a totally different caliber of experience in a way that's like hard to grasp for a modern graphics product, where it's like, turn it down to medium, run it at 720p, it runs. It was not like that back in the day,
You would have been there for the Great Crisis debate, though.
I was playing Crysis, but by that time I had a more powerful PC with an 8800 GTX in it, so that was nice. That did pretty well. That was not too bad.